Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to episode 3 of D Ruins Films, the podcast for film lovers and haters alike. You may have noticed we took a short break, but we're back and better than ever with a fun little controversial topic planned for today's episode. But we hope you missed us while we were gone. Before we dive into the main topic of the discussion for this episode, let's get into D's top 5. In no particular order: Exhibiting Forgiveness, featuring Andra Day. Also, Ingenue Ellis Taylor is in it. It's an amazing indie film that did well in the Sundance circuit and is truly stunning, very emotional, very powerful, and a very, very moving message. I encourage you to watch it. So I spotlighted One of Them Days in an early episode, and I got around to watching it, and let me tell you, it's funny. SZA, girl, you are hilarious. Same with you, of course, Keke Palmer. We expect that of her, but it really is giving like Friday, like energy meets Girls Trip energy. We really love to see a black buddy comedy, and we love to see a black buddy comedy led by women. So definitely check it out on Netflix. Survival of the Thickest, season 2. Speaking of Netflix, such a good season. Oh my goodness. Season 2, I loved season 1. Season 2 really takes season 1 to the next level. The comedy is top tier. The conversations are top tier. The storylines, the character arcs and development, top tier. Tasha Smith playing a queer character is chef's kiss. Definitely worth watching. And that's also on Netflix. For my Apple TV girlies, Roar is such a good horror anthology series. If you have Apple TV, they don't really advertise their shows like that. You just kind of have to stumble upon it. And I stumbled upon Roar, and my goodness, each episode is a different arc, a different storyline, but we've got some powerhouses in there, and it all features women. So I'm telling you, go watch it. It's worth it. It's good. And my last one is a sad one, but it's a good one. Drift. I recently watched it on Amazon Prime. It's an indie film, I think, that came out in like 2023, something like that. It's very sad. It talks about a refugee who ends up on a Greek island. It's very, very heavy. So I'm just letting you know right now. If you're looking for a good cry, this is probably the film for you. If you're not trying to be in your feelings, you might want to hold off on this. But it is an excellent film. It's very good, very deep, very moving. And so that is the top 5 for this episode. If you check any of these out and you have opinions that you want to share, please hit us up on social media. We love to hear what you guys think. So let's get into the in focus for this episode. It's time to lay to rest an age-old argument between two major departments in filmmaking. I've been wanting to do this for a while because the conversations online, offline have always been hilarious, but I also felt like we need to talk about it. So we're going to talk about it. The two departments that are often at odds about who's more important to filming are camera, cinematography, and sound. If you are involved in any degree of film discourse, you may have caught some of this, in the past. Camera often insists that picture is the most important aspect of film. Sound will rebut that without good sound, a film falls apart. We're going to start the discussion this episode by talking about the pitfalls of bad sound versus how good sound enhances a film, and continue the conversation next episode talking about cinematography. Hopefully, by the end of it, we'll all come to some consensus about which department is right. And we'll probably have a poll about it. So before we get into kind of dissecting good sound versus bad sound and talking about like how sound impacts the way a film is perceived, I want to do a brief overview of like how the sound design process works generally. For those who don't know, I actually got my foray into filmmaking through sound design. So this is an area that I know very well. So with the sound design process, it really begins, technically it should begin in pre-production with the script breakdown, when we have all of the heads of department coming down, sound department should be at the table in regards to talking about what types of equipment are going to be needed, what kind of sound they want to capture, all of that. You have to think about that at the very beginning. The heavy lift though does start with the sound recorders and the boom operators on set. I think it is important for me to mention that pre-production is important to the process because that is truly where it all begins. But I definitely want to dispel the notion that sound work on set is insignificant or that it's not important, because it very much is. There are several moving parts to be considered on any set when it comes to sound. Capturing dialogue is obviously important, but even capturing simple sounds like footsteps, doors opening, the way a cup is placed on a table, all of it matters and all of it has to be considered. Sometimes a script will emphasize certain sound effects for story reasons, for character reasons, and that will be important for the sound recordist, the sound designer to work to get those on set or to wait until post to potentially add it in. But generally speaking, every movement, every action that we make has some kind of noise that accompanies it, and that sound has to be captured. As well, there's something called room tone that has to be captured as well, because every space, outdoor and indoor, has a frequency of sound that fills the space. And that has to be added to any sound bed for a film. Otherwise, it's kind of lacking, you know? That little hum, the undertone hum is important. After the film is shot and is in the edit, the sound design team takes the sound captured on set and begins creating the sound bed. During this time, if there are any additional sounds that need to be added or any existing sounds that need to be replaced or corrected, this is where we see ADR or additional dialogue recording and Foley and sound effects at work. I'm not going to go too deeply into all the details of that here. If you want more details, I'll do maybe a follow up later down the road where we kind of break that process down a little bit more. For now, it's just important to know that there will be some added sound brought in and mixed in with the sound that's captured on set to get the best, fullest sound bed to fill out the film properly. And then in the end, music is usually added per the director's desires. That is how you get sound for picture. That's the basics. This is kind of a crash course. This isn't the complicated stuff. This is just enough for you to understand how it works, how the process works, and what that might look like on the average film set in the average film production process. Each film is different, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So, what I want to get into is talking about the specifics of different films that we see really good sound design on, but also some of these ones that have really good sound design also have some flaws. And we want to talk about how that impacts the ability for people to really get into the story and to really be engaged with the film. One of the things that I truly believe firmly is that sound is important and has always been important. Even in the silent film era, those stories were enhanced with music. Music is a form of sound. They also sometimes use sound effects. Even if they didn't have dialogue, they might use sound effects in those silent pictures. So sound has always been key to the storytelling in film. One of the films that I want to talk about and break down a little bit that had excellent sound design and, in my opinion, deserved a nod for it at the Oscars was Nope, directed by Jordan Peele. So there are several interviews out there with the sound designer talking about the process of making all of the sounds and building out the sound bed, and especially focusing in on how they created the sound that represents Jean Jacket, the UFO that is the terror in this film. But there's a couple of different things about the sound design that stood out for me immediately. First of all, it's the use of sound to build suspense and generate terror. So one of the things that often is discussed and taught when you're learning about filmmaking, especially in like a film school setting, is showing versus telling. And that's usually talked about in like the writing dialogue, writing a script aspect of it, but it also translates into the filmmaking aspect of it with cinematography and how the director kind of like frames the shots. How do we show people what's going on versus telling them what's going on, narrating it, doing a lot of exposition? Because that's the thing about having a visual medium is you can show it instead of telling it. Like in a book, people have to imagine it in their mind. So you have to tell them, you have to feed them the details. But in a film, I can show you by pointing the camera at the thing that I want you to pay attention to, or the details that I want you to focus on. And I can make that even more specific by doing a sort of focus on the specific item or the specific person or the specific facial expression that I want you to focus on. Similarly, with sound, instead of showing, we can sort of create an opportunity for people to hear even when they cannot see. And that hearing without seeing will invoke emotion. And you may notice this sometimes a film, you'll hear a sound effect before you see the object that's making the sound. So you might have a film where an alarm clock is going off and you can hear the alarm clock going off, but you may not see the alarm clock until later in the shot. Maybe the camera pans, or maybe we cut to it, or whatever. That is an example of letting the audience hear it without seeing it, giving us sort of some clue as to what's happening, and also invoking emotion in us. It should trigger some kind of feeling or some kind of thought within us. So with Nope, how they use that device to generate terror is you don't see what's happening. You may not see what's happening, but you hear it. One example is the scene. If you've seen the film, you know what scene I'm talking about, with the chimpanzee or the ape. I'm not 100% sure. The primate, where homeboy is under the table, and you can hear the screeching, and you can hear the violent action that's taking place. You can hear the squelching of blood and all of that stuff. But you don't see it all. Like you can see like little bits here and there, like you can see the feet moving and all of that, but it's mostly you rely on your hearing to dictate what's going on. And the boy's reaction to that as he's under the table is what you're focused on primarily on a visual standpoint. But that sound cue, those sound cues, ev- evoke emotion in you. They make you feel things. They make you feel the terror of the moment. They make you feel the suspense of the moment. They make you feel like, oh my God, this is horrible, but you're not seeing it. And so that's one example that Nope uses that. And there's several examples throughout the film where audio cues, sound cues are used to trigger terror in you, making things more suspenseful, making things more uneasy for the audience, making you feel a little bit more on edge because you're not sure what's happening. When we can't see the thing, we feel a little bit more fear. And that's something that I learned early on in my horror film storytelling journey, is that oftentimes when you see the fright, and this is not every time, but when you see the fright, when you see the monster, when you see whatever it is that we're supposed to be afraid of, it sort of demystifies it. It doesn't always demystify it. Like you still may be very terrified or horrified, but we have a lot more fear when we can hear things that are scary or suspenseful or horrifying, but we can't see them. So Nope does a beautiful job of kind of using that horror storytelling device through sound, building that suspense and that anticipation, and putting you at unease and unrest with the situation because you don't see what's happening. And this is specific to Jean Jacket, who is the UFO, the monster that we're all supposed to be terrified of. Even from the beginning, the way that she's introduced in a subtle way that just sounds like wind, like a breeze, like a kind of heavy-ish breeze, kind of tricks the mind. You think that, like you're definitely unsettled because you're like, it's windy. Like, why is it windy? What is causing this kind of wind noise? But you don't see it, and you're not hearing anything particularly horrifying or terrifying or super scary. So you kind of have like a false sense of security almost while being a little bit uneasy without really realizing why you're uneasy. You know that something is afoot, but you're not quite sure what it is, and you're like, maybe it's not that big of a deal. And another way that they kind of play in that is like mixing that innocent sounding vibe wind, simple wind, with more horrifying sounds like screams as we start to understand who Jean Jacket is. And we start to see how she functions. And we start to have a little bit more reason to be afraid of her presence. We have that like mixture of the wind noises that represent who she is and her movements, but there's other movements that come into play as well with her, other sounds that come into play with her as well. But like the way that she moves through the atmosphere is that wind noise, and then you mix it with the screams of terror that really adds to the horror of it all. And it's just brilliant. It's brilliant. There's like the stillness before she comes that's just brilliant, and building up this anticipation of waiting for her arrival. There's all of the noises that she makes, especially when she's in her full form. Just all of it is very brilliantly done, and it shows intention, and it really does drive the story, and it drives the emotionality behind the story, and it drives the way that characters interact with her and the story as well. So that's one example, one film example that I definitely recommend that people watch, and they watch with fresh ears to hear how sound design really plays a role in telling the story. Another one, a classic example, um, would be Star Wars, specifically The Empire Strikes Back. The first aspect of that I really want to highlight is film score, because I think one of the more overlooked parts of sound and sound design in film is the score. The score definitely plays a part in telling the story. It's a part of the process of sound design. Like that's one of the final steps in building out a sound bed is having the underscore of music that is placed strategically in different parts. And there's the composer who comes in and like creates the music that represents these different moments and these different scenes based on what the emotion is supposed to be. And really, that's to help drive that home. It's to help drive home the emotionality of the moment. But it also sometimes can lend itself to some creating something that becomes iconic, something that becomes memorable, something that people will latch onto and immediately be able to identify for years to come. And that can be said very firmly about the Imperial March. You hear that score and you know, and I'm not going to sing it right now. Go look it up if you are not sure what I'm talking about. But the Imperial March is an iconic piece of film score that when you hear it, you automatically think Star Wars, you automatically think Darth Vader, you automatically think, you know, the the villains in Star Wars every single time. And that is just one example. And we'll talk a little bit more about film score and music driven narrative in some of the other examples that I give. But that's just one iconic classic example. The other aspect of Star Wars, specifically The Empire Strikes Back, is the process of building a sci-fi world through sound design. So I talked earlier in the process about how you'll capture sounds on set, you know, the rustling of a dress in the wind, the clacking of heels against a hardwood floor, the creak of a door opening, the way that a coffee mug hits the counter. All of those are things that are practical sounds that you can mic with a boom, or you can use like an ambient mic, set it up in the center of a space. Like if you're outside, you might be catching traffic noises in an urban area, or you might be catching nature sounds in the middle of a meadow, and you can set up an ambient mic to capture all of those things. Those are like practical sounds that we can easily pick up and get on set. You may also have to come back and do some additional sound effect work later, but like there's opportunities for you to capture those sounds on set. But when you're talking about a made up world that doesn't really exist, now you have to get a little bit more creative. Now you have to think a little bit outside the box. And so there's a lot of recording and creating and thinking, using, you know, animal noises and then slowing them down to create certain sounds. There's, you know, different, like there's different like things that you can record, and some of it doesn't require practical recording. Like you still have to like record the animal noises, you know, the raccoon noises or whatever chattering sound that you want to capture. But then you have to like think outside the box. Be like, okay, well, how do I take this practical sound that does not like that doesn't necessarily fit what I'm looking for and make it into something that is what I'm looking for, and then becomes the sound for this particular thing, you know, this made up aspect of this world that exists. And so that's where creativity and sound, you know, kind of like gets to take off a bit more. And it's important. It's important because without that kind of creative thinking, we would not have the world of Star Wars. Not from a sound perspective, like the sound of the lightsabers, we wouldn't have that. We wouldn't have the sound of, you know, the we wouldn't have R2D2. We wouldn't have the AT-ATs. We wouldn't have, you know, the sound of these spaceships. Like we wouldn't have any of those things if it wasn't for a creative sound design team thinking outside of the box and taking practical sounds, but also taking some maybe unique sounds and finding ways to blend those together and to, you know, slow things down, speed things up, whatever, to, you know, throw an effect on it to make what we now know as iconic sounds for this world. The lightsaber sound, recognized everywhere. We know what a lightsaber sounds like. But somebody had to think about what can I do to create that sound, because the sound of a lightsaber doesn't actually exist. They had to build that out somehow. So this is why like I argue that sound is important, because that creativity helps create these worlds as well as tell the story. Another example, Lord of the Rings. So this one, I'm going to talk about the good things about it, but I'm also going to talk about some of the challenges that kind of lead into how not so great sound can really impact a film a little bit, and like impact the way that people perceive a film. So Lord of the Rings is known for its big sound effects, big music, big booming dialogue, you know, Gandalf and his big yelling, you know, you shall not pass, like all of that stuff. Like that's what we know Lord of the Rings for. It's this massive fantasy world with this massive story, and there's a lot of big things that happen. So there's a lot of big sound. And it's so important to balance the three of those. You need to balance the big sound effects, you need to balance the big music score, you need to balance the big dialogue, so that all three are married together perfectly to tell the story the way that it needs to be told and to invoke the right emotions, because there are moments in Lord of the Rings that are quieter. You have that iconic film score, of course. You have the Shire film score. You have the like all of those things are classic to Lord of the Rings. So you've got these film moments, and then you've got like the battles that have like these big, intense underscore music, but also they have like the sounds of swords clanging and, you know, rocks hitting, you know, walls, all kinds of big booming noises. And then also you have big dialogue moments even in there. But then also you have like the quieter moments. You know, you have the more faded dialogue, the more, you know, relaxed, quieter moments in between those big moments. So finding ways to balance the big with the small to tell the tale, but also to make sure that the emotion is still present in all of those moments. So this is also a good film to give an example of like what a music driven narrative is without it being an actual musical, because it's not a musical. But the score signals various events and emotions throughout. When we have the Shire, we have brighter, happier music. You know, when we're dealing with the ring wraiths, the music gets a little bit, you know, more intense and scary, but also like urgent, because they're trying to like get away from the ring wraiths, or they're trying to hide from the ring wraiths. As they're approaching Mordor, you've got that again classic like it's eerie kind of. So there's all kinds of aspects of that score that really push at your emotions as the story goes on, that signal different things that you're meant to feel in different moments. When you hear the music for the Shire, you're supposed to feel like happy, relaxed, like at home, because that's the whole point. It's like the Shire is this warm space that's supposed to be protected from the outside dangers. And then, like, you have, like, with the ring, the ring creates this air of mystery. So you have this eerie music that represents the ring, and like the need to get rid of it because it's all powerful, but its power is also very like, ooh, what does that mean? And then again with the ring wraiths, like this urgency of I need to get away, like we need to get away, we need to hide, this is scary. So that is a music driven narrative. The one point of contention that many people bring up, and I hear it a little bit myself as somebody who has a background in sound, is balance in regards to what happens. And this is an example of like what happens when you, and I wouldn't call Lord of the Rings sound design bad, but what happens when you start to teeter on not so good sound design, when you start making mistakes, when you start having issues. So a lot of people talk about like dialogue in that film, and specifically Gandalf's dialogue being sometimes indiscernible or difficult to understand, unless he's like really shouting. And there are moments where it's a little bit mumbly, muffled, and I'm sure, especially on set, like any miking that was done for Ian McKellen, or Ian McKellen, was done thoughtfully and with care, considering his costume, considering his movements, all of that. There's a lot of action involved, horseback riding, fighting, all of that. Sometimes, and this is why I mentioned ADR, or additional dialogue recording, earlier, sometimes you got to take it back to the studio and just run the lines in an isolated space. As much as we want to authentically be able to capture dialogue on set and include all of the surrounding noises as much as we can, or like include that space, sometimes you got to put somebody in a booth and like capture some of those lines in a clean space so that you have cleaner audio that can be understood. And also, it's a balancing thing too. Volume plays a factor in that. If you have like a lot of big noise going on, but the lines are a little quieter, it's important to really like play with the volume balance so that like dialogue is still heard, but also those big sounds can still fill the space that they're supposed to and create the emotional moments that you want them to create. So that's just like a small critique. Lord of the Rings in its early stages, it was, you know, the sound quality was a little bit different than like what the Hobbit films had, and now the Lord of the Rings television series has. So I think it's gotten better, but definitely in some of those early films, you can hear where the dialogue isn't as, clear, especially for Gandalf. My next example that I want to get into is The Zone of Interest, a recent film that, if I recall correctly, was nominated for an Oscar for sound design. It was definitely Oscar nominated in multiple categories. If I remember correctly, I believe one of them was in fact sound design, and I think that it deserved that. Honestly, it was very brilliantly done. There was a minimalist approach that was taken in regards to the sound effects and the sound bed created, and even like music that was included to highlight the powerful and impactful story that is being told here. And the story that we're seeing in the sound is really the juxtaposition of what is perceived normalcy and great horror. So the zone of interest is following a Nazi commander type. Like that's what his role kind of is. So he's a commander who is overseeing a concentration camp, and his family literally lives like right outside the gates of this a concentration camp. And so we're talking about the Holocaust here. We're talking about a very heavy subject. We're talking about something that is a dark part of our history, our world history, but we're looking at it through the lens of who the villains are in this story. And it's done in a way that's artful. Like, I know people are like, oh, are we humanizing the villains? Not at all. Actually, I think it's an incredibly powerful film that really points out how horrible people do horrible things, but also then just go back home to be perceived as regular people despite the horrible things that they do. And I think that like it shows this dichotomy of, you know, obviously we believe these people to be monsters and terrible people, but it shows, it really shows, like, first of all, how that system is upheld, how people are given permission to be horrible and do horrible things because they go home to families who think nothing of their actions and think that they're justified, or, you know, think that it's normal to have those things going on or to be participating in those things. And so that is played out in the sound as well, because you have this everyday life, you know, they're living in their home, going about their lives, you know, carrying on as if, you know, they're just regular human beings doing regular human being things. But in the background, you're hearing the constant reminder of the concentration camp. You have the constant hum of the concentration camp in the background. You've got the screams, you've got gunshots, you've got planes flying overhead that remind you that even in a picture of what would be allegedly a good life, you are constantly being reminded that that good life is being built on the blood and bones of people who are being genocided, which is powerful. It is powerful, and it's a powerful way to tell a story, and it's a powerful way to use sound to tell that story. When I kind of like looked into how the sausage got made with this particular film, it was kind of described as shooting two different films in essence. You're shooting the concentration camp and you're shooting the home life of the commander. And so having to find the balance between those two things and figuring out how to capture the sounds and to create the sounds that would be the undercurrent of terror and horror and awful things. Instead of room tone, as I talked about earlier, I referenced room tone. Instead, it's death tone because it's the constant hum of the concentration camp, the constant sound of the ovens, you know, the constant sound of gunshots in the background. So that is the room tone, as it were, for the film, but it is actually instead death tone. Like that is powerful and also emotional. One of the things that I found interesting about this film is that they didn't use boom operators on set, which is very rare, which means a lot of the sound, all of the sound really, well, not all of it, because there are ways to capture sound without using boom poles, but a lot of the sound was captured outside of the set, meaning they went to different locations or they worked in the studio, they created different sound effects to denote different things, probably using lavalier mics to capture dialogue on set, probably had some ambient mics as well to capture like background ambient noises. But, you know, the sound of the gunshots were created in a controlled environment, not on set. No boom operation in that regard. So it was very interesting to me because that's something that, like, I, as somebody again who started out in sound design, like I've always felt like, you know, you need a boom operator on set. Like that's a key role. But learning that it wasn't necessarily needed in this instance and there are ways to get creative with it is intriguing to me, and it's something that I personally would like to explore in my filmmaking. And I would definitely love to look at more films that kind of use that technique where they're not doing boom operation, because I think that that is an interesting way to go about it. So that's the zone of interest. Definitely encourage people to watch it. Obviously, in light of this particular episode, watching it to pay attention to how the sound works and how the sound drives that narrative and tells the tale of two films and two lives and creates that undercurrent of death and genocide. But also, it's a good film. It's a very, very good film, and I encourage you, if you haven't seen it, to watch it, because I think we need the reminder, especially in this time, about what it is we do not want to repeat in regards to history. We need to remind ourselves of the history so that we do not fall into those same patterns and repeat it. The last piece that I really want to get into for this episode, talking about sound, is a television example, actually. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So Buffy the Vampire Slayer has a lot of excellent examples of the use of sound design and getting creative with sound design to create these worlds. And especially as we're talking about like the horror of what is going on in Sunnydale, California, and being right on the Hellmouth and all of that stuff. But there's one particular episode that I want to highlight because it gripped me the first time I saw it. And it is the death episode. It's called The Body. It's when Buffy's mother passes away. She has an aneurysm and she passes away. And what I want to specifically highlight is the power of silence. And it's not fully silent. There's dialogue, there's sound effects, there's room tone, all of that stuff is still a part of it. But music is absent intentionally to highlight and heighten the emotion that is supposed to be felt as you're going through and experiencing all of this and seeing everybody's, reaction to the loss of Buffy's mother. It's very character and dialogue focused. There's not a ton of dialogue throughout. And that's also intentional because it wants you to focus on the character emotion. It wants you to, you're supposed to connect with the characters and what you're seeing, which is the perfect way for us to tie into visuals. And we will in the next episode. But with dialogue and with the sound effects and the room tone that exists, the lack of music makes the episode heavy. There are so many examples of film and television using music to really heighten emotion, and it's a powerful tool, especially in sound design. Music has the power to move us all. And so, you know, we listen to a song, we connect with it lyrically, musically, and we feel things in reaction to what we're connecting to. In the same way, in absence of music in a film or television episode has just as much ability to impact our emotions, especially as we are latching on to the story that's being told and the emotions that are being served up to us on screen. So in this episode, it was so artfully done, and I remember it. Like, you feel the weight of the loss and the weight of the grief that each character is feeling and the way that they are reacting to this loss, because there's nothing there to enhance that. It's just their raw emotions in that moment. So we are left to feel it for ourselves versus having the music tell us that we need to feel it. Because, yeah, I'm sure they could have added some little strings under some melancholy music underneath to really highlight the somber moment and the pain of the moment. But I think the choice to exclude music did more work for it and created more of a space for us to really connect to the characters and really feel their pain the way that we were supposed to without relying on that music to do so. Again, and then you have all of the other sound effects. You have the room tone when they're in the hospital. You have, the different sound effects that come into play. You have the dialogue that is spoken. It's impactful, it's powerful, it really says a lot, and it carries a lot of weight. And that is enough in the sound bed. That is enough. We don't need any more. We don't need the music because we can feel it in other ways through that sound bed. So, in conclusion, sound is an important tool in film and television. It's important for invoking emotions. It's important for building character arcs. It's important for creating worlds and bringing them to life. It's important for pushing the story forward and signaling different changes in the story, whether that be emotional or character driven or whatever. Sound plays a key role in the narrative. So we really cannot film, and we cannot have a good film or a good television show without it. Sound is important. Sound makes the picture. We need sound to make the picture. And that has always been the case, like I said earlier, because even in silent films, they were not totally silent. They may not have had dialogue, but they had other sounds included that were meant to invoke emotion, were meant to help enhance the storytelling that's happening in a visual medium. So sound is important. And that is from your favorite former resident sound designer who is now turned writer director. Moving right along, our creative spotlight for this episode is the movie Sinners and Ryan Coogler as a director. First of all, movie Sinners, I am planning to go see it soon. Everyone who has seen it has spoken very highly of it. I have heard that the best format to see it is in the 70 millimeter IMAX. So if you have the ability to make that happen for yourself, I encourage you to do it. See it in that format. See it in the format that it was intended to be seen in so you can really get the full experience. But if you can't, just go see it. Go see it. I'm going to go see it. I'm hopefully going to be able to talk about it in a future episode. Go see it. It's black vampires doing things in the blues-esque era. First of all, that's like you said all of my favorite things pretty much. So I'm very excited about that. But I encourage others just to support it because it's a black film and it's doing really well in the box office. And that's why I want to highlight Ryan Coogler because he is the first black director to have 4 films gross at 100 million or more. And like, love that. Amazing. Such a huge feat, such a huge accomplishment, but also surprising that it's taken us this long for a black director to have 4 films to achieve that milestone. Especially because we know that we want to see black film. Black folks, we want to see ourselves on screen. And we know this. And like other people want to see us on screen too. Like diversity on screen is something that people demonstrate time and time again is profitable to these studios. So why we are just now seeing a black director really achieve that in the box office is a big question for me. And part of that definitely is opportunity. We need more black directors to be able to have a seat and to be able to step up and have these opportunities to have their work seen on the big screen so that they can smash these records. And also, some of it is the way that films that are created by Black people are marketed and how that plays into their success. Because there are lots of films that should probably do a lot better than they have done. But because marketing is not necessarily funneled into it or considered in the strategy, it's not reaching a wide enough audience to have that level of success. We have seen time and time again that when you give Black people the opportunity and the space and the resources, that they thrive and they exceed expectations. So let's keep doing that, please, because I want to see more black directors smashing these box office records and having these milestone moments where their films are grossing 100 million or more, in the box office. Which that actually is a perfect segue into our takeaway or our key question for this episode. And that question is, how do we overcome all of the cancellations of diverse and inclusive media? And what does that look like when we consider the idea of building our own structures instead of waiting for scraps from a table we are rarely, if ever, invited to? And what makes me think of this, obviously, is seeing a lot of television series that highlight, diverse folks, black folks, brown folks, people of color, queer folks, women, you know, trans people who are being at the front of these series being canceled, or seeing even movies that feature black folks in the forefront or at the helm that were slated to be made. These films were slated to be made are now being shelved, now being pulled, even though they're in development. And it's concerning, obviously, especially in the times that we're in right now, but it's just concerning in general to see that trend. And it reminded me, and I've been thinking a lot about this speech since I first heard it, of Ingenue Ellis Taylor's speech that she made at the American Black Film Festival. She said something very poignant about she didn't want a seat at the table. She didn't want the seat or the table. She wanted the structure, and she wanted the land that the structure is on. And it's such a powerful and impactful statement because there is something to be said about like not just being, in a space that really isn't designed for you. It isn't designed by you or for you or with you in mind, but is designed by and for people who wield a lot more power than you. You know, yes, getting a seat at the table is nice because then we feel like we're in the room. We feel like we have the opportunity to like be seen and heard. And that's true. There's truth in that. However, there's still about power dynamics at play because you're sitting at a table built by somebody else for somebody else in a room created by someone else for someone else on land that belongs to somebody else. So even though you're in the room, even though you're in the space and you are now being seen and heard, you are still limited in the power that you have to change things, to bring about change to the industry, to bring about change in offering those who exist at the margins more space and opportunity. So, in a world and in a society where we're not holding the power, and we are being reminded of that viscerally by seeing our media get canceled, by seeing diverse media get canceled or get shelved or pulled, from development. um that's a reminder that the power is not ours ultimately. But when we own the structure, when we own the land, when we have created the systems ourselves, amongst ourselves, to support ourselves and each other, now we have the power to say, this is what's getting made and when. Now we have the power to see our work continue on and on and on, and to continue to be able to tell the stories that we want to tell in the ways that we want to tell them. So, my thought is that's how we overcome those cancellations. That's how we overcome the shelving of our work. That's how we prevent our work from being hidden further. We have to find a way to come together and create the structures that feed us and give us the opportunity to do what we want to do, not because they want to throw scraps or a bone at us here and there to pretend like they're checking some box that they really don't care about, but because we do care about these things, and we don't care about it from the lens of like hitting a metric or mark, but we care about it because it's our lives, it's our experiences, and it's our representations that we want to see. So that is my thought. We have to create the structures. It's going to be hard. It's not easy. We have to be committed to it. But if we commit to it, we can do it. So, on that note, I leave you and encourage you to think on that. And if you have something you want to contribute to that particular conversation, please do talk to us on social media. We want to hear from you. Comment on the podcast and the platforms that you're able to. We want to hear from you truly and sincerely. We do. So anyway, thank you for rocking with me on this episode. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about sound and letting me nerd out about sound design and how important it is to visual storytelling. Next episode, we're going to dig into the cinematography of it all because, like I said, we're putting this argument to bed. By the end of the next episode, I'm hoping that you will have a firm understanding of the importance of both of these departments, and you will have a strong idea in your mind about which one takes the cake in regards to being the most important to filmmaking. Hint, it's not what you think. That's all. This is D signing off.